And we are recording. So these class recordings will appear on a YouTube playlist at this link on the Twin site. So if you are interested, give it a whirl. And again, let me know if, for whatever reason, you would prefer classes not to be recorded. What we will be doing today, part of which will not be recorded, is we will spend most of class actually in a workshop getting some hands-on experience with some of the secondary sources that I talked about in the screencast. One thing I want to mention before we start with that, actually a couple of housekeeping. I tend to start with housekeeping. First, I had mentioned class participation last class, and I neglected to mention that I am a literalist when it comes to the term class participation, meaning if you participate with regard to class, that's a good thing. So if you're not a speaker in class in a group, that's totally fine, I get that. Emailing me, asking me questions, it just tells me that you're engaged and thinking about whatever it is we're talking about the assignment, and all of that is thoroughly encouraged, including some of the great questions that actually many of you gave me on the screencast. Which I will try to address, many of which today, and if not, next class. Other thing I wanted to mention, here on Westlaw, I don't know, you should have received the email, but you probably get a million emails from Westlaw, so you may not read them all very carefully. Westlaw is updating its security, grown, and I say grown because that means everybody has to change their password. You have to change your password to include 3 of the so-called special characters, capital letter, exclamation, @ sign, whatever. And you want to do that in the next few weeks because it's much easier. They haven't given us a date yet, but when they do, after that date is going to get much more difficult. So here, when you first log on to Westlaw, if you click on Update, they make it nice and easy. It's just the usual change password kind of thing. So I highly recommend that you do that and get used to it because we'll be using Westlaw a whole lot, as I'm sure you already do. Okay. So let's get started. And as I mentioned, most of the class is going to be on a workshop. And I mentioned to the couple of you that came up to the library with me last time that what we're going to do throughout the semester is explore a particular legal problem. So I'm going to present that to you today, and what we're going to do before we go up into the library is we're going to run through a little bit of basically issue spotting analysis. This class really isn't about legal analysis and legal thinking. You've done a whole lot of that in most of your other classes. I'm really focusing on the research part of it, but of course you can't really successfully research if you don't know what you're researching, right? You have to identify the issues. So I'm just going to run through a little workshop exercise on that just to get us thinking along the lines that you might want to be thinking, giving you some ideas if you haven't already gone through this exercise. Okay, so the hypothetical we are going to be talking about throughout the semester involves I as a client walk into your door, always a good thing to have a client walking into the door, and I'm going to tell you my history, which is that I was born with a heart defect, and as I age, I really wanted to go to a cardiologist to make sure I didn't have to worry about anything, and really for preventative care. I work for a highly esteemed university, and that university, like many employers, provides me health insurance. And when I contacted that health insurance, because while I work for a highly esteemed university, I don't have tons of money to spend on healthcare. When I contacted the health insurance provider, they denied my coverage, and they said, "Nah, we don't want to spend money on that." So, like I said, I don't exactly have a whole lot of spare funds, so I didn't go. Bad mistake on my part, because 6 months later, I had a heart attack. Question.
I'm sorry, where didn't you go?
I didn't go to the cardiologist.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So I didn't go to the cardiologist. 6 months later, I had a heart attack, and it turns out I probably had some symptoms that might have been identified had I gone to a cardiologist. So now I'm spending whole lots of money and missing work and very uncomfortable and miserable. And so I want to sue my health plan Now, these days, most employers, if you're lucky enough to have an employer that provides you health insurance, usually they provide HMOs, which stands for Health Maintenance Organization, if you weren't familiar with that. So I want to sue the HMO that provides my health coverage for denying me coverage to go to a cardiologist. Now, we're going to be working with this throughout the semester, and unlike the hypothetical I gave you last class, you get to ask, well, you could have asked questions last class, but you get to ask questions. In fact, you're encouraged to ask questions. Because whether I am the client walking in the door or I am your supervisor saying, hey, I need help with researching on this issue, if you have a factual question, you really want to get that straight. If you recall last class, we had some debate as to whether libel and slander had anything to do with our particular question. So if you have a factual or a legal question, definitely ask. Okay, so as I said, I want to do a quick issue spotting exercise, and you probably learned this first year and maybe in other classes. One way to start to think about how you are going to approach a problem and how you're going to research a problem is the old journal questions: who, what, where, why, when, how. Now bear in mind, depending on the issue, some of these questions may be useless, irrelevant, and then some may be more complex and overlap. Don't worry so much about whether to answer, what category. Get the important facts there and whatever beginning thoughts you have on legal issues going. So let's start on who. And with the who, I sometimes like to think about who are the main characters, who, if you're talking about litigation, who's being sued, who do you want to sue? If you're talking about transaction, who do you want to buy, who do you want to sell, who do you want to contract with? Again, it depends on what the client is and what they want. So with that explanation in mind, who are we talking about here?
The client
Okay.
and the HMO.
Okay, so HMO, I mean, clients sort of assumed. You're not, think about also what's going to help you figure out what you're going to research. So HMO, there was just shout out.
Cardiologist.
Okay. Cardiologist. Okay, so the client, who is the client?
Employee.
Employee, okay.
The employer that provides the insurance.
Okay. And you'll see why I will not probably write on this board again. I know my handwriting is atrocious. So if you can't read it, let me know. Okay. Okay, so what? What happened? What do we want to happen?
Should I mark that? Healthcare coverage, denial of healthcare.
Denial of health care coverage. Okay. Where, also known in legal parlance as, what's the legalese for the where?
The jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction, yeah. Okay. Another reason I don't write on blackboards, I can't reach. Okay, so where are we?
We don't know.
Okay, so that's something you would
Let's ask.
ask. Okay. Shock of shocks, we're in New York. In fact, we're in the second department, which might be relevant. Okay, that's an easy one. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to another easy one. When? And we are worried about when because?
Statute of limitations.
Bingo. Statute of limitations. And Helena, you had your hand up?
When would be months ago when she was denied coverage?
Okay, so we said 6 months, in case you didn't catch that detail, I'll put it up there for you. So 6 months ago. Okay, so now here's where there may be overlap. Okay, so what is it that your client wants to do? Let's go back to the what a sec.
I think sue because of being denied coverage that led to her not going to the doctors, which led to her heart attack, which could have been prevented if she did go.
Okay, so sue, and when you sue someone, you are trying to do what?
Recover damages.
Okay, damages. Again, it doesn't really matter what column you get this, and you are trying, before you get to the damages, they have to be shown to be, okay. And it'd help if I spelled that right, wouldn't it? Liability. That's close enough. Okay. And the how, again, you may or may not use these columns. Arguably, the why might be denial of healthcare coverage. It doesn't matter that we have it on the what. Any other why? I mean, why are we suing? Okay, there isn't. Like I said, there's no rule that says you have to put something under every column. The how, I kind of think of the how for more regulatory issues. How are we supposed to do this? How are we not? What are we not? How are we not supposed to do it? What are we supposed to avoid? How can we? How must we? Are there something that requires us? That may be a question we get to later when we actually get to the actual lawsuit, if we determine that that makes sense. Any other thoughts? Okay, so what would be, looking at this beginning, what would now be some of the legal issues that you think, as I will assume that none of you are experts in healthcare law? Okay, good. Don't have any ringers in here. Neither am I, by the way. Okay, so what are some of the issues you think might be legal issues?
So maybe like the terms of health insurance coverage, employer's health insurance.
Okay, legal issues, health insurance, terms of coverage. What else?
Maybe like what's the liability on a health insurance company for denying coverage?
I'm just going to put that down here. Liability of health insurance company for, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Denying coverage.
Denying coverage. Denying coverage.
I mean, I guess on the terms most specifically would be whether they lawfully denied her coverage or not.
Okay, so we have the denying coverage concept. Lawfully. What?
I don't know if this is just saying that in the reverse, but whether or not the health insurance company has a duty to actually approve a claim to prevent something from happening in the future.
Approve claim for prevention. John?
Causation.
Causation. Okay, so the next step might be to figure out where in the legal universe we might want to start. We don't know anything yet, so it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. How do you know where you want to start if you don't know anything about the issue yet? You got to start somewhere, right? So, we can approach this, two ways to approach this. Doesn't matter what order. So, first way is to figure out, all right, here are a whole lot of words, even just Googling it or typing it into Westlaw or Lexis, you gotta start somewhere, right? So what do we think are the key themes that we would want to start either in Google or Lexis or Westlaw or even, heaven forfend, a print index? That's kind of the key statement of our issue. We already have it.
I guess we wanna figure out what laws govern healthcare coverage and denial of healthcare coverage.
Okay, so health care coverage, denial coverage. Any other key factor? What about our players?
Pre-existing condition, stuff like that. On the part of the, obviously, the employee.
Okay, these days,
You
And-
can't be agnes, yeah.
these days pre-existing conditions can't disqualify you
Okay.
from coverage.
Whether an HMO, if it differs from insurance companies.
Okay, so we have one of the key concept is one of our cast of characters, HMO / health insurance, and what I will tell you as the assigning attorney in this case, an HMO is one type of health insurance. So in your research, you don't know, and this is where we'll talk about this a lot more in a couple of classes when we talk about Boolean searching, but this is where you need to be careful because I'm going to give away one of my favorite lines is computers are stupid. Google, as brilliant as it is, may not know that an HMO is the same thing as a health insurance company. Lexis and Westlaw sure don't yet. Google is getting better at equivalencies, but I don't know if they're that smart yet. Okay, good start. What I'm going to try to do after class is play with a new feature I just learned on my camera phone, or phone camera, whatever, the panorama, and see if I can get a picture of this so I can post this along with the recording. So if you, for whatever reason, you want to look back, you can, although how you read my handwriting is another question. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to decide, we're going to go up to the library and we're going to use the old-fashioned print. And the reason we're going to do that is to give you some hands-on experience with print indexes. Why are we going to do that when there's Google and Lexis and Westlaw? One of the reasons is to answer one of your questions, and let me see if I can remember who it is. I think, Dan, it might have been you, asking, what do you do when Lexis and Westlaw, if the secondary sources are outside of your plan and cost tons and tons of money, how do you find reliable secondary sources? One of the answer is you go to the library and look at the books. Not preferable, but it may be that if you're a solo practice and don't want to spend hundreds of thousands, and it's literally maybe six figures, maybe you do want to trundle on over if you're near a good law library. We have a number of practitioners actually who do come to the library to use the good old-fashioned print. So one reason we're going up to use the print is to give you some practice in using the index. You saw in the screencast sort of a review of how to use indexes. And also to give you an introduction to the secondary sources. A couple of you mentioned you'd like some experience with encyclopedias and ALR. And those are basically the two types of secondary sources we'll be looking at. Okay, so first thing I will do is divide you up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I think then if we've got 9, we'll stick to the 3 groups. And since there are a couple of interests expressed in the screencast, I'm going to try to put you where you expressed your interest. So let's go with John, Helena, and Adam T. Why don't you look in New York jurisprudence? Yijun, now help me with the pronunciation, I'm sorry.
Wow, that's perfect.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay, so Yijun, you mentioned an interest in ALR in the screencast. So why don't you take a look at ALR with Dan and Justin. Oh, we have a new person, Justin. Everybody say hi to Justin. You're kind of getting just an introduction to everybody as I go around. So why don't you 3 take a look at ALR, and Adam, David, and Kate, you take a look at AMJUR, American Jurisprudence. Okay, I will warn you, one group's going to have a real hard time, one group's not going to be easy, but it's doable, and one group should have it fairly easy. And that's in part an explanation of how do you know which secondary source to start with. I think somebody asked me that, and the answer is it depends on your issue. And for some issues, some are going to be better, and for other issues, another, and the only way you go is to look and decide, hey, this is great, I'm going to spend some time with this, or I've spent 10, 20 minutes looking and I'm not finding anything useful, I'm moving along. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is go to the sources that I just assigned, and bring back, I have a cart waiting for us upstairs, bring back the relevant volumes that seem the most relevant, have the best section. Again, one of the groups isn't going to find anything great, but do your best, and bring whatever index you use. I have this document camera here. If all works well with the gods of technology, we'll put the document camera on so everybody can see what it looks like. I haven't had much success with document cameras, so don't get your hopes too high on that one. But I don't think it'll be critical either way. Okay, and the last thing I want to do, just because we don't have a ton of time, is just to get a sense of where you think you want to start in the index. So everybody doesn't go off in too many different tangents. I don't want you to spin your wheels for too long.
Like what terms?
Yeah, I mean, you need to open up the index and you need to go to a letter and you need to start looking for a word, just as if you would need to type in the words in Lexis, Westlaw, Google, whomever. So what words?
Health insurance.
Okay, that sounds like a good start. Any others? In case that one doesn't work. What are some, so we have our issues here. What other terms?
Health insurance terms or coverage?
Well, health insurance. Actually, the type of health insurance we're interested in is HMO, so that might be another. And what else? What's some of the other operative key terms or key operative terms?
Coverage, denial of coverage.
Denial, coverage. Okay. Let's get going. Just trying to think if we need anything else. This room won't lock, so I think our laptops will be okay, but we wouldn't leave personal effects. I'm going to hide my phone. Since I said I want to take a picture later. Okay, let's head up. Everybody okay with stairs? You all know how to get to the library if you want to take the elevator. I hate waiting, and that elevator is the slowest elevator I've ever been in. I will wander around, and if you have any questions, again, one of the things is ask.
Yeah, right. You feel a little better about that. Not that much better though. Actually, it's so much more awkward because it's so like deep and so quiet that no one wants to say anything. You know? I feel like.
So here are the fruits of your labors. Okay, I am going to start with the ALR group. Let's see if I can get our document camera. So ALR group, you looked in the index under what? HMOs. And actually you had a good, well actually you didn't start under HMOs. What did you start under?
Health insurance.
Health insurance. And so HEAL, health. Well, here's health and human services.
I think we were under health and accident insurance or something.
Health and accident insurance. Okay. And of course, you can barely see that. Let's see what happens if I zoom it. Can you kind of see that? Shall I try a couple more zooms?
Maybe you can make the whole window like full screen.
Let's see if that helps. A little bit, but then I have to scroll. Oh, then I have to not scroll. This is why I don't like document cameras. Okay, so health and accident insurance. And what did you find under health and accident insurance? You looked under,
HMOs.
okay. So, HMOs, and now I'm going to have to. Okay, so this is what I was trying to describe to you ALR folks, and not ALR folks, AMJR folks, all these A's. AMJR folks is, so we looked under health and accident insurance and we got health maintenance, HMO, this index.
Yep, we found an example of that actually.
Okay, and then we figured out we needed to go not to health and, but to,
I think we went to health and maintenance.
Yeah,
So-
essentially HMO.
that's what I was with, the health
Yep.
and A, and health M, health maintenance M. And now I know it sounds pretty basic, but I can't tell you how many times I answer this kind of index question at the reference desk, and not just students, attorneys. So it's one of those, 'cause I think people just don't use indexes much anymore. They get out of practice, which I can understand. And I gave you my tennis example last class where I'm terribly out of practice. So, okay, so health maintenance. And so there's health maintenance organizations. And what were you found two good ones, I think? Are they in this?
Yeah, the failure to authorize treatment.
Failure to authorize treatment, so this one, right? Okay. So, how would you rate ALR? Scale of 1 to 5.
For being a text, I think it was 4 or 5 because it's relatively straightforward and easy.
Okay, so 4 or 5 in terms of being, I wasn't,
Being a text instead of being online.
okay.
Because I prefer online because you can access it anywhere instead of having to go to a specific location.
Yeah, no question online is easier, but ALR might or might be one of those secondary sources that cost a whole heck of a lot of money on Lexis and Westlaw, and unfortunately it is not on Bloomberg or any other online source that I'm aware of anyway. But in terms of the quality of the results, whether you think this is going to help you with our question.
Yeah, I think it provides a good overview and gives you a good place to where you need to go next.
Okay, so let's just, I'm going to pull it up here on Westlaw. So it was 56 ALR 5th, I think.
Yes.
737. And yeah, obviously online world's easier. So you can see I've highlighted some passages, and yes, this was the one I anticipated. The other one that you found looks like it might have to do with insurance brokers as opposed to patients, but I'm not sure. I would want to read it and say, hey, maybe this one's good too. But I think we agree, ALR group, that this one looks pretty promising. So it talks about a patient alleging injury due to negligent health care brings a negligent suit directly against the medical practitioner provider, emerging systematic, however, where the third-party payer, utilization review, costs, refuses third-party payer, so there's a new term we might want to remember, refuses to authorize particular treatment whereby the patient alleges that this decision caused harm. Sounds pretty close, I think. Patient may bring action directly against third-party payer for that pre-treatment denial, although it is likely that the patient will not prevail. Bummer. Okay, so here we see reference to HMO, applying both tort and contract principles. You were mentioning tort, so. And what I want to scroll down just to the introduction, because it's worth, when you find something useful, it's sometimes useful just to read sort of the beginning to get your feet wet. And the reason for that is this annotation discusses healthcare cases dealing with liability of third-party payer. We now know what that means, resulting in third-party payer's negligent denial of authorization to treat. So kind of your duty of care comes in there, negligent denial. We were talking about that in the New York Juror Group. This annotation includes cases where the underlying state negligence claim was preempted by federal law, particularly sections of the Federal Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, otherwise known as ERISA. So here we have something that seems pretty much on point, and here is a brand new concept. I don't know if you thought about, I wonder if this is federally preempted. But I sure wouldn't have in my initial meeting with the client. And what we learn. Okay, so that's ALR. So we've learned, so we would agree, Dan's 4-ish, at least in terms of content. Granted, the books we won't give a 4. Okay, let's move on to the AMJUR group. Now, I'm not going to repeat the index under the document camera unless you think that there's something relevant to look at. Okay, so what about the actual section in insurance you found in the insurance volume, right? Okay, and what was the section?
Pretty much just, I was, actually, let me reference it. Sorry, forgotten.
What section was it? Oh, it was, I think, 540-ish.
Yeah, I think it's 544.
I think they're just employee coverage, like generally under health insurance.
Okay, so would you say more or less on point than the ALR?
Much less.
Much less.
Too general.
I guess it would help if I switched over to the document camera. So, well, there's 540 generally. We can't really get a sense of generally what from looking at this. However, one tool I talked a teeny bit about last class was the table of contents, and actually I showed that on the screencast as well. So let's take a look at 544 in the table of contents in the insurance topic. $544, right?
Yeah, it was 540.
I think it
Oh, that's
started
right, 40?
from 540.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, here
540.
we can. So risks and coverage under health and accident insurance policies. So 540, nature of health insurance. There are a whole bunch of generalies. 543 is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and 544 looks like it's maybe under, it looks like it's under that patient. So it's talking about the individual generally, then the individual mandate. So this is looking at the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's particularly, at least it might be relevant, but certainly not as relevant as ALR, and I'm not sure I would want to, since it seems very general, I'm not sure I'd want to spend time trying to figure out whether it is. Sometimes it's useful in a resource that is organized by topic, like AMDR, unlike ALR. ALR just, the articles in ALR, sometimes called annotations, just, they get put in randomly. So our article was about third payer liability. The next article could be a constitutional law article. But if we go back here, sorry, wrong tab. If we go back here on Westlaw, and actually I didn't really have to do that. One way of pulling up anything you want to look at on Westlaw is just typing in the title, and then if we were to go down to insurance, so this is a nice way to look at the table of contents online. And insurance, there it is. So here is an old-fashioned print resource, a table of contents, reproduced online, and actually I can tell you it's rare that I look at anything on Lexis or Westlaw or anything. If it has a table of contents, it's rare that I don't use it, just because it gives me a sense of what the context is. Sometimes just scanning the table of contents, I can learn some of the important terminology. Maybe third payer, I would learn something like third payer, maybe that's important. Certainly it sounds like this whole ERISA preemption thing we're going to have to worry about. But just to scan through the table of contents, see where it might, see if there's a heading that jumps up. Risks and coverage is what we were under. And so general and determining coverage, and maybe there's something close by 544 or 540 whatever that might be more useful that we would discover by going to the table of contents. Okay. Any questions, by the way, just chime in. Now what I'm going to show you before we move on to New York Jur, don't worry, New York Jur group, we'll get there, is something called the Table of Laws and Rules. And honestly, I sort of don't expect you to remember this, which is a shame. This is just a quick example, and I suppose the librarian in me can't resist showing you this, that online isn't always better than print. Print can be occasionally. This is a table basically that once you know a particular statute section, you can then figure out where it's explained in AMDR. And so if we had continued, and I'll go back just, if we had continued to look at that ALR article that was so useful, we would have discovered in here that ERISA section, that preemption that we're going to have to worry about, is actually, we would get the US code site for it. I'm trying to see if I should have highlighted it. Let's see if we go down. So there we go, footnote 7. So when you're reading about what preemption is all about, we would discover that that whole preemption section is in 29 U.S.C.A. 1144. So back in this AMDR table of law and rules, if I had learned that, and I want to say, all right, let me see if AMDR can give me a decent explanation of that. I'm just turning here to 29 U.S.C.A. 1144 and switch over to L document camera here. And you can see, oops, 29 up here. And you can see 1144, this is subsection A, actually, or subsection B, refers me actually to pensions. And you'll see there's pensions and employment. And I just randomly picked the first page I opened to for 1144. That's actually pretty much it. So it's actually pointing me not to insurance, which honestly I agree with you makes the most sense, but pensions and employment. And what's interesting about, if we take a look just at one of them, and we don't know what subsection we're interested in yet, granted, but if we take a look at pensions, one of the references we got there, I snuck it on the cart, one of the references we got was 717 in pensions. we would get a nice explanation of what all this preemption, so maybe it's going to be the same explanation as ALR. I haven't done an analysis, I haven't compared the two, but this table of law and rules when you already have a section is actually really useful. Unfortunately, it's not reproduced online. So either you just have to know about it and find the book and schlep all the way back to the library, or what is probably going to happen is it's probably going to go the way of, I don't know, the 8-track tape is always the favorite example people use for that. But just you do lose a little online now and again. You know, there's nothing you can do about it sometimes, but there it is. Okay, New Yorker. I don't want to neglect. Added. Oh, I forgot to ask before. Sorry, New Yorker. Before we go on, Amger, scale of 1 to 5.
1, 2 maybe? It wasn't very helpful.
1, 2 wasn't very helpful. I think you're being generous. I don't think it helped at all, but okay, you're nice people. Okay, New Yorker. So you're kind of spread out a little bit. So what did you ultimately found something that started to be useful, I think? Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, eventually we got to malpractice when we were looking up stuff for that. We didn't really find anything in time. I think if we had more time, it could have been useful. We would have found more stuff, but we didn't really, because there's a lot to go through with malpractice, and we didn't know exactly where or what.
Okay, but you think you would have found something within malpractice or a different topic entirely?
I think within malpractice.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Now, Helen, I know you took a path to malpractice. It was leading you to malpractice to
It
you.
led me to the same place. There was a subsection in malpractice for HMOs, and it did discuss liability, but I didn't read the entire.
Do you remember the number?
Malpractice 15.
15. And the path in the index you took was?
115, sorry, that's a bit of a difference.
Yeah. So the path you took in the index, you started under what term?
I started under duty of care, and then that led me to degrees and standards of care, and then from that it told me to go to practice.
Okay. And sure enough, under malpractice. Now think about it. We think of malpractice, at least in the healthcare realm, with doctors, right? But we also know outside of the healthcare realm, there's also that nasty concept of malpractice with regard to attorneys. You don't like to say that too much. But for whatever reason, New York Juror puts the discussion of health maintenance organizations under malpractice. And so, if we can't read this, I'll pull it up on Westlaw. So we take a look. This provision does not bar or preclude health maintenance organization, and we don't know what provision we're talking about. Being held vicariously liable for malpractice. Okay, so that's a little bit different. So they're talking about vicarious liability. They're talking about state law. Causes of action against HMOs are preempted by Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA. Heard that already. Where HMO employees not actually medical care providers sued merely for their capacity as administrators who determine what medical treatment to pay for, or as the insurers who pay independent contractors provide the actual care. So there are a whole bunch of footnotes I'm going to want to follow up, and this is in New York, so hopefully it's going to give us a New York perspective on this. Okay, so New York Juror, rating 1 to 5.
3.
Okay. I'd say that's fair. Other New York Juror, do you agree with that?
I didn't really have enough time to look through, so I can't say for sure.
Fair enough. Okay. So let's take a look at using these resources online a little more in depth. So what might we want to put in Lexis or Westlaw if I was a nicer person and could let you do that first? Okay, you would have gotten this assignment, and maybe you would have sat down at Google first, and we'll look at Google in a moment, but say you have an unlimited plan, or as you do now, student, and you're allowed to use Lexis or Westlaw. You'd sit down, you'd pull up Westlaw, a couple of you would pull up Lexis, we'll do that in a minute. What would you throw in?
ERISA?
Pardon me?
ERISA? At this
ERISA?
point?
Well, you learned ERISA.
Oh,
That's
okay.
cheating.
I mean, just going back though, you said the New York State would give us a perspective of this topic, but if we're preempted, then we're not gonna have a New York State perspective, right?
We're going to have to figure that out, aren't we?
I mean, I would assume, because the federal law is preempting the state law.
Well, we don't know that yet. We know that there's this preemption issue under ERISA that we're going to have to worry about.
It's
But,
most likely.
well, I would strongly suggest, as students new to a field and as attorneys very experienced to a field, don't draw any conclusions until you
Okay.
you
You
look
think this
into it.
falls under an exception? Because usually ERISA preempts pretty strongly in New York State.
That's what we need to.
Okay.
I mean, do you feel comfortable telling me, your client, sorry, you're out of luck?
No, I didn't mean from that sense. I just meant that we're gonna have to fall under some sort of state law exception.
Do you feel comfortable telling your client ERISA preempts you?
No.
Okay. So we want to continue to figure out what this whole, anybody else feel comfortable saying? Okay. Anybody else want to investigate further this whole ERISA thing? I mean, it sounds like you have learned a little bit, experience, I don't know if you've worked with just in class, but anybody else familiar with ERISA? Okay, so it sounds like we want to investigate that further. That there is one of those additional questions I mentioned in the screencast as to one of the reasons why you want to use secondary sources, because new questions may come up in the course of your research. Well, sounds like this is a pretty good example of a new question that came up in the course of our research. Okay, so we will definitely investigate ERISA further, and we will count on John to guide us through with his superior expertise than at least some of us, because I certainly would not qualify as knowledgeable on ERISA. Okay, but let's investigate our secondary sources. Let's not worry about the ERISA question quite yet. We'll come back to that. Don't worry, but let's just take a look at Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg, and Google to see how these secondary sources work for us on those services. So here we are at Westlaw. What are the terms we would put in? If, as I said, I was a nicer person and let you start on Westlaw.
Denial of health insurance coverage?
Denial of health insurance coverage. Okay, so basically getting to secondary sources on Westlaw, let's put aside the cost issues for a moment. We will be talking about them, don't worry. Fairly straightforward, as I'm sure you Westlaw users know, and Lexis actually users, you should know this too because it's pretty similar. Basically, if you know you want to look at secondary sources, and hopefully I've convinced you that we need to for this particular problem, just go to secondary sources. Now, of course, this presumes you know what secondary sources are, which we now do. And then what Westlaw does, as does Lexis, is just throws them all in here. So first one we come up is a pension plan guide. It may be final rules implement. I don't even know what any of that means, honestly. Question.
Should we be looking at New York stuff instead of all states?
At some point, yes. Initially, not necessarily. For instance, that ALR article, if we narrow to New York, we may or may, that's not New York specific, but that ALR article, based on your votes, we agreed is worth looking at. But absolutely, we want to be cognizant that where we are, our question where, but we don't necessarily need to do that first. Obviously, far more important when we start to talk about statutes and cases, because then we have to. So prior to worrying about jurisdiction, let's scroll down. If we decided we wanted to narrow by particular publication, if for whatever reason we thought, hey, maybe ALR is good. Just as an aside on ALR, I've heard from lots of law firm librarians that attorneys don't use ALR anymore, which I think is kind of sad, because ALR, as we'll see as we investigate that article, actually does a lot of interesting things for us. But we'll look at that next time. So we could limit by ALR, we can limit by publication name. And actually, I'm going to reverse myself. Let's look at it now. Why delay gratification? Just out of curiosity, let's see if our search brought it up. Come on. So if I wanted to narrow by publication type. So I'm just showing you how you would find the various publications on Westlaw if you wanted to narrow particularly. I'm not sure in a project like we now have that you'd want to just say, oh, I want to look at ALR, oh, I have to look at AMDRA. You'd want to look for a good secondary source wherever it came from. Of course, eventually you want to start to think about costs. But interestingly, our particular ALR doesn't come up in the first screen. It's not to say it's not here somewhere. So let's investigate ALR a little bit further so you can see what it does and why it can be useful, and I think it's a shame attorneys don't use it anymore. David, I think it was you who were interested in a research log.
Yeah.
Westlaw and Lexis, and actually Bloomberg, will keep track of your history. I think that's probably not your directly answering your question, because
They get too cluttered, I feel like there's just too much going on.
but they are useful, as you can see, just for navigational purposes, to go back and find something quickly, as well as what will tend to happen, I'm sure you experience in various classes. You start to work on one project for one class, and then you work on another project, and you get back to the first one a week or two later, and it's like, what did I do? So knowing about the history on Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg can be useful. Okay, so let's just investigate less the text in ALR. Essentially, what ALR do, it will give us a beginning of an explanation, and the nice thing it does is it gives us a table of jurisdictions. So it tells us both statutes, federal and state, as well as cases, both federal and state. So it will start to both give the explanation as well as give us references. I kind of think in the spectrum of short to very long, ALR is a little bit in the middle. It's in the middle of encyclopedias like AmJur and New York Jur, which are very short explanations, and much longer explanations on the other end of the spectrum, law reviews and even treatises even further beyond law reviews. So ALR is kind of in the middle. And as you'll see, this one, it's not just a paragraph or two, which sometimes all you'll get in an encyclopedia. And as I said, it gives you an explanation as well as the references with that table of jurisdictions. So you can go really quickly and say, okay, what is there for New York? So actually, let's scroll up and see what's for New York. Sixth Circuit, if anything. Okay, so New York is not mentioned specifically here. One thing you always want to do, whether you are online or in print, and Kate, I think this was your question, and that is you must update, update, and update. And I say it 3 times because it's that important. How many of you remembered to look in the pocket parts? Now, I didn't give you enough time, in fairness. So, but both the pocket parts, both if there is such a thing, most indexes are just the whole thing's thrown out and you get a new one every year. But actually, the ALR, you had a bound volume, so you might have wanted to look in the index to see if there was anything up to date. Certainly, the encyclopedias, if you did find a good section on print, up to date. Online, what tends to happen is they just incorporate anything that's in there. So here we see that this was originally published in 1998. What that's telling us is it's pretty out of date. What they would do is if there were any new cases that are relevant, they would add them in. So we will see cases that are later than 1998. But you can't count on this being the last word, the last and most up-to-date word on this particular issue. But it sure looks like it's going to be useful to help us figure out this whole preemption question and what other questions we might want to ask from there.
I'm sorry, I missed that. So even though it says it was originally published in 1998, but don't they continue to update it like on a yearly basis?
Well, what they do is, I just see where this is. These, I just want to find the cases. If they're later cases, they will.
It's an indicator.
So I don't know if I see any later cases than 98, but they will add them in. But it's not like somebody sits down and reads the content and says, does this reflect the latest law?
Oh, I just saw that up there that says ALR databases and made current by weekly edition.
Of relevant new cases.
Okay.
And honestly, scanning this, I don't see too many cases post 98.
Right.
So it doesn't, even though they're saying they do that, I'm not entirely, let's put it this way, I wouldn't count on, oh look, there are no later cases, I've got the most up to date.
Right.
And that goes to that bibliographic awareness. I'm looking at my resource and trying to figure out how it works. And okay, so this is going to be good to give me sort of the basics of what it covers, liability of third-party payor. Okay. In terms of, are you all comfortable finding secondary sources on Westlaw? We found ALR, we looked at this article. AmJur would also be in there, other encyclopedias. New York Jur would also be in there, just in that list on the side. Let's see if I can get there real quick. I do want to get to at least Lexis, if not Bloomberg. Did I go too far? Yeah, I went too far. Yeah, so basically you would just narrow, as I did with ALR. Here's CJS, Corpus Juris Secundum. That's the other encyclopedia. I chose AmJur just because most people prefer AmJur, although CJS is perfectly good also. Maybe it's just AmJur's easier to say. But here you can see AmJur, and you would just narrow it again like we did for ALR. And if I knew for whatever reason I must search, sometimes what I will do, because New York is state-specific, and forgive me, I forget who asked about state-specific secondary sources in the screencast, but one thing I do a lot on Westlaw is I look up New York Jur, because I do want to see that basic explanation of New York law on whatever it is I'm interested in. So if we wanted to look at denial of coverage, and we want to see what's going on in New York, that would be one way I would do it. Again, being cognizant of whether New York Jur is in my plan or not. Okay, let's jump over to Lexis real quick. I know we're coming to the end. See, I changed my password on Lexis too, so they match, and then I have to remember to put it in the new way. And it works pretty much. I'm shortcutting a little bit here just to show you the mechanics of how to find secondary sources. And again, they call it secondary materials. As long as we know our terminology, we're good. And it starts with whatever Lexis has decided to sort by relevance. And again, you can see you can narrow by law reviews, jurisprudence. If we choose by jurisdiction eventually. And we can do the same thing. Notice as I type in, Lexis does the same thing. It gives me choices, so if I want to look for New York jurisprudence, I can just type it in the same way I can type in Westlaw. So if you know that's where you want to go because you want basic intro on New York law, that would be how to do it. We'll talk about finding secondary sources in other ways on Lexis and Westlaw, either next class or the following class. Last but not least, good old Google. So what shall we put in our Google search? I've just been doing denial of coverage because I'm a lazy typist, but do we want to put in something?
Denial of coverage sounds good. Denial of healthcare coverage.
Denial of healthcare coverage. Because Google, I'm kind of interested in the results here. So we're getting coverage for pre-existing conditions. We've already, actually, I think we talked about that.
Pre-existing conditions.
We talked about it in the big group. If you talk to all your small groups, I want to keep track of what I say in the small groups versus everybody. So how to appeal a health insurance denial, but that's not really the law. That's more of a how-to. If you're denied Medicaid, no, that's not us.
Rights and protections, maybe?
Where do we, rights and protections? Okay, that might be worth checking out. So Google, by all means, is a great place to start. And actually, we'll look at Google more next time when we talk about current awareness sources. And don't worry, I'll define that next class. So in terms of getting us something useful to start our investigation, just scanning these results quickly, would you say they are better than, as good, not quite as good as our ALR, which is the best one we found?
Not as good.
Ellen, I know you're a Google. I'm going to pick on you now for the rest of the semester because you're such a Google fan.
Yeah, I didn't like any of the three. I'm gonna stick with. I'm gonna stick with my laptop.
So you would say Google, just reading these as best you can tell.
I would have definitely tweaked my search. I maybe would have done HMO or health maintenance organization, and then duties or liabilities, and then get it honed in on that. New York.
HMO. Whoops. Just going to do it quickly. I know we're running out of time. Health maintenance organization, duties, New York. Should I keep denial of coverage?
Sure. Narrow it down.
And I know you want to try different combinations of those terms, but let's see what happens. And I'm not trying to convince you or anybody that Google isn't useful. I will convince everybody that you don't want to stop with Google. Great place to start, absolutely. Just don't want to stop there, especially as we start to get into more complex areas, which our question will become, especially with this whole preemption aspect to it. Although Google will help with that too, I think. Okay. That is it. I don't want to keep you too much over. I do want to respect your time. I do want to remind you, however, we do not have class on Tuesday because Tuesday is Monday. Because Monday is the real Monday is Martin Luther King Day. So I will see you next Thursday. There is another screencast, so please take a look at that. We'll be talking about current awareness sources and treatises. Screencast is mostly on the treatises aspect of that. Do remember or think about changing your Westlaw password so you don't have to go through the whole hassle whenever it is they decide to make us do that. And that's it. Question, yeah.
Yes. What about Google Scholar?
Oh, excellent question. How many know about Google Scholar? We'll look at Google Scholar next time.
Thanks.
Oh, it stopped. I have no idea what this recording is going to be like.